If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense.
Hear ye, come on. You're listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
We got a couple extra bodies around the table, bro?
Who do we got, Joel?
I don't know. They're your invited guests.
They're my guests. I know.
You do the honors.
I know. So I want to welcome the hosts, the hosts from Teachers Like Us podcast, Andre and Alyssa.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Hey.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no problem. Again, we're gonna definitely clarify this whole strike thing, and you guys are, of course, better suited than us to explain what's going on. But first, can you let the listeners know what you guys do and what your podcast is about?
Okay, so we are the co-hosts of a podcast named Teachers Like Us, and it tackles the experiences of racialized teachers and kind of the experience that our racialized students are going through. So we try our best to kind of speak through just, I guess, everyday topics, but from our perspective, because we are the teachers that are kind of missing from the narrative traditionally.
And then we try and go into ways that we can help enlighten other teachers of how to treat their marginalized students, essentially, or to hopefully gain from our experiences and how we deal with those same marginalized students.
And how long have you guys been doing the podcast?
Ooh, it's recent. So our first episode launched January 8th, 2020. So we're just a couple of weeks in, really, or a month in.
Okay, and how's the feedback been? Like, do your teacher peers listen to it or anything?
Yeah, a couple of teachers in the building listen. I have a lot of friends that come up to me. I even had one. I was at a birthday party on Saturday and had somebody come up to me and say, "Hey, is that El Boogie?" Because my daughter was there, and I was like, "How do you know her nickname?" And he was telling me, like, I listened to the podcast. I was like, "Oh, okay, wow, okay."
So I don't know if this is a weird question, but the students listen to it?
Funny enough, some of them do. So I guess the ones that we're closest with have caught on, and like our setup is on our desk, right? Or on my desk in my classroom. Mm-hmm. So they constantly come in and what's this? And we say, we're doing a podcast. They've asked us what it's called. We kind of have shied away from it, but somehow they're super sleuths. And a couple of them listen. Their parents listen. Mm-hmm. So,
with your podcast, I'm a bit of a loser, so I listened to everything on 2 times speed. So I crushed all of your episodes yesterday. And I,
not even that long.
No, yeah. Well, no, it's just a habit, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, it means I basically got through everything in an hour.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Instead of 2. So yeah, for the listener, you guys have 6 episodes released so far, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Is there any particular episode you guys have liked the best? Or you enjoyed making, or just the conversation itself being the most interesting to you, anything along those lines, or maybe one that you're about to release even.
What was our second episode? See, I'm awful with the episode title names.
Building authentic relationships with students.
Yeah,
that's the best one.
That was the best one, only because it somehow just flowed. Like, I do a lot of the editing for our podcast, and I'm the switcheroo of things. So I'm like, ooh, I don't like this order, and I'll switch the order of the way we're speaking. But that one, we just kind of set up the mic, we went for it, and it kind of went up the way it was recorded.
Yeah. What I the listeners will actually hear what I'm about to reference the week after with our final episode. But Darnell and I were talking about coaching and how, in essence, kind of going through struggle with people and kind of showing them you have their back. I thought resonated a lot with what you were saying in that episode, where those authentic relationships require almost substance in terms of you went through something or you experienced something, or in essence you're showing the students you have their back.
For sure.
Absolutely.
As opposed to just how many teachers they just you never know them as a student. I mean, I'm sure you guys can remember just going through a class where you never even had a conversation with your teacher almost. So.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the premise behind Teachers Like Us. Everything we talk about is about the relationships that we've built with our students. So the only way we can speak to all of these things is because we've built those authentic relationships. And so even though the topics are different, the kind of underlying theme is that if you don't know your students, there's no way that you can build on anything from there.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. That's literally what we push in every episode. You hear it come up all the time, the fact that you need to be talking to your students. You need to be interacting with them. You need to ask them, hey, what's going on in your actual personal life? And let me maybe use my lessons to help bring out some things that are going on in your life so that you're actually engaged and actually interested in what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, the value piece of that maybe without getting into some of the social issues that we talk about today, I think, whether somebody agrees or disagrees with, I'll throw some buzzwords like, black, I was going to say white privilege. I almost said black privilege because that's what Darnell uses on one of our podcasts. But, white privilege or different things along those lines, I think we may have room for a conversation around those things. But what we would agree with is, and I think both sides, when I say we, both sides would agree the solutions within the classroom is teaching the students in a way that they can understand.
Mm-hmm. And we so call that culturally responsive teaching. So those are our buzzwords when we talk about things like that.
And that's where, like, I would say I might want to challenge that word just because I think the idea of like culturally responsive, because to some extent I would say, are we not bringing in a bit of cultural division within the term? But anyways, without going down that road, where I was saying is I would resonate with what that actually looks like. Right. So the idea of knowing your students, knowing how they learn, knowing their nuance such that if you say, you talk about, I know at one point you guys talked about, I think it was you guys talking about the names kind of changing within problems from being like, John and so like stereotypical European sort of names to things that are more ethnically diverse. And I would say to some extent, that's a really simple, almost, I want to say meaningless example.
Yeah, that's literally what I said in the podcast.
But
it doesn't mean anything.
It does demonstrate the principle of like, I don't want to speak to my student in a way that they're just going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. Right? Like if you start giving a skateboarding problem solving scenario with none of your kids have ever skateboarded, like you're just not able to communicate. Right. And so I think that's where so much of what I've appreciated from what you guys have in your content is really about understanding the students, whether or not they're, one demographic or another, like that. I would almost argue that becomes irrelevant. It's just about those 30 kids or whatever the number is, and getting to know them as individuals, to know, hey, I'm going to have to teach a certain lesson a certain way, but these 4 kids, I'm going to have to do X, Y, and Z as well, so that they don't get left behind.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think part of understanding when we talk about culturally responsive, because I think the first thing you did, you were like, ooh, culture, but then you went right to kind of ethnicity, right? Like your link to culture was ethnicity in terms of not like when we're thinking about restricting students or like kind of separating cultural separation, the culture means like, do you like dance? Do you like all of those things make up culture as well. So when we're being culturally responsive, it's not just being ethnically responsive. It's understanding that, yes, these kids like badminton and basketball versus skateboarding. It's that idea that we know more about the students than just their names.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't intend to make it sound like I was going because I think you actually raise a good point that but that's where, some of the challenge that I have, and this is like going deep into I want to say theology of it, but how much of the labels like culturally responsive potentially problematize things that shouldn't be problematized. And that's where I start to go again, without going down the idea of like white privilege, it's like, are we problematizing whiteness when in reality, these are privileges we want everybody to have? And so And problematize is actually a really important word, because if you know the underlying theology of critical race theory, intersectionality, there's an intentionality with problematizing things. And so that's where, I start to go like, wait, are we problematizing something that becomes the new other if you want to use those terms. And so as opposed to promoting towards common good, we're creating a different bad that we're trying to avoid.
I feel like that's your privilege speaking, in that you're thinking about, if we do this, then we get othered or another group gets othered. Whereas if you kind of look at things historically, that's not going to happen, right? Like, Eurocentric standards are standard. And even with a rise of all of the quote unquote others, you're not going to see a place where whiteness is othered. Whiteness is still always the standard. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at things like that. I don't think
whiteness is a thing. Like, I don't resonate with a culture of being white. Like, no one I know that is white identifies as white.
That's your privilege speaking.
No, it's not. See, because I wanted to go down this road a bit because I think it's a good conversation.
Okay, go ahead.
And because I think that white privilege, if it's a proper principle, applies universally.
Say that again.
If it's a proper principle, it applies universally. Does it apply in Hong Kong?
Is there white privilege in Hong Kong?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We just talked about this on
the
last podcast. We talked about shadeism.
Okay, but that's shade. I love that you went there, because I would say, is that, if you took away white people, would that still exist? I don't know. And I don't think we can. Like, I'm thinking within, because I'm assuming you're talking about shadeism within the black community. Is that?
Well, all
we
community.
did.
Okay, okay.
But we touched on the fact that even in countries like Japan and Korea and Hong Kong, skin lightening is a thing. Like, and it's to be closer to whiteness because whiteness holds power.
Exactly.
And so, I don't know. You can argue semantics all day long about, like, if white people didn't exist, you do.
Yeah. No. But that's my question, though. Like, is that? And this is a question I know we can't necessarily answer. But what draws us towards lighter? There's a fair point that, like, okay, this represents power, and for some people, sure, I would say, like, power is king for some people, but a lot of people, power is not what they strive for.
But power doesn't necessarily mean power over in terms of dominating things. Power is holding cultural capital, right? In the fact that when I look at the TV, 9 times out of 10, who am I seeing? Who is standard? Now that they're trying to introduce kind of more diversity into characters, you will still see a lot of mixed couples. So they're bringing in black people, but again, there's always a white person there. And then their kid is this light-skinned, curly-haired, almost blonde.
In the bank commercials.
Exactly, right? Like, these are things that we notice and that you may not, because you don't have to. And it's not that white privilege and this idea means that, again, you have all of these things given to you in life. It just means that your race is not the thing impacting all of those struggles.
Yeah, well, and I think, that statement is also why I have the problem with the term white privilege, because it points the finger in the wrong direction. Like, what you just said was actually almost nothing to do with whiteness. It's, how some people treat certain races. Or so, again, my thought is, like, the problem we as a society have is the underprivileged, or those that aren't given, let's say, equal opportunity because, someone's judging them based on race, or preconceptions that people aren't thinking about. So that's where I would say, like, so much of that conversation I can resonate with, while I take issue with the word, because I'm like, aren't we not pointing in the wrong direction? Like, don't we want, like, and it's not so much that I'm, like, as you started with, it's not so much that I'm worried that the white people are going to become the other. No, it's like, are we trying to demonize the person who has that privilege? And that's the concern, because I want everybody to have those privileges. I don't want to pull down the person who has the privilege.
So, like, in the context of you guys, like, being in the classroom.
I know we kind of
this could go on
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that, no, it still ties in, but to what Joel was saying and what you were saying, just, I'm curious, like, how does that play out in the classroom? How do the white students, are the white students aware of the, what's the term of white privilege.
The disparities between whiteness and them, absolutely. But
I was gonna say, going back to your point of us, we are not necessarily trying to demonize white people, right? We're more putting them on awareness of, hey, I know it's something that I say a lot of the time. We know it's not your fault. Mm-hmm. We know that you didn't own slaves. We get but we need to put you in a situation. We need to make sure that, especially for the kids that are in our classroom, that especially in classrooms in Peel where the white students aren't there all that much. So now when we have these,
sorry, Andre, what do you mean by they're not there?
So perfect example. I teach 2 grade 7 classes. I have 0 white students in my class.
Yep. I teach 8 classes, and I want to say I have maybe 5 or 6 out of that entire 8.
And that just has to do with, I guess, our demographic of Peel, like
where you're
we live
located.
in Peel,
where we're located
right?
in Peel. Because if you go to like South Mississauga, you're going to find a different demographic.
For sure.
If you're going to Port Credit, are you from Port Credit?
One Park.
Oh, buddy.
LP
It all
what?
makes so much sense.
Sort of, not really. Actually.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Keep talking. Sorry, I didn't realize that was the demographics. It's pretty cool.
That's why when you said like the word demonize, that's the thing that we can't do is because now in the classroom there might be only 1, 2 in the class. So now when I bring up these topics, I have to make everybody else not just stare at that one student and say, "Oh, you're the reason why."
Well, but this is why I'm actually critical of the term, because my point is not that you're doing it. I'm saying the term it does that. And that's why I brought it back to that idea of critical race theory and the intentionalities of problematizing things. And so I would make the challenge, is that not the inherent intention, such that now it's making your job harder to be like, okay, here's this thing, white privilege, but don't hate the white people. Like the fact that you have to start that way, to me, actually symbolizes what I'm trying to say, that the term itself has problems that transcend what we're actually trying to address.
I get that, but then I also make my students aware that it is not our jobs as marginalized, or their jobs as marginalized people, to make white people feel comfortable about a term that's making them uncomfortable. It's okay to
but I'm not
sit
saying
in your
it's-
discomfort.
But I would say, honestly, that makes no difference, because I'm not discomforted by the word. Like, it doesn't bother me.
But many people are. You
Yeah.
may not
Yeah.
be, but the term white privilege makes people so squirmy. Like, we have staff meetings and we talk about a lot of these things. And we asked, as our equity committee, when we were allowed to do things like that, we sent out a message saying, what are some things you'd like to talk about? What are some things that make you uncomfortable? The thing that made most people uncomfortable was the idea of white privilege and saying the word white privilege.
Well, and I would argue it's going back to what I'm saying, because the term inherently demonizes whiteness. It essentially points to the evil in terms of the way the word has been utilized, the way the word has been brought forward. And so that's where I say I take issue with the term, not what the term is trying to point out.
And I say sit in that discomfort.
Yeah. Sorry, Andre. Can you like further unpack? Because I found it very fascinating that, well, both of you, that your classes don't have predominantly white people, because that was my experience back when I was in school. So when you said that, I was like, oh shoot. So how do you communicate the ideas of social justice or white privilege when you don't have whites in the class, or even if you have like a few and you're still trying to accommodate them? Like how do you do that?
I'd say one way is, now that we're in February and we're looking at Black history, and that's where the topic comes up of, okay, you had these oppressed people and look at the people who did it to them. And that might be a lot of people's focus. You look at slavery and you say, okay, these Eurocentric people came, took people from their homes, brought them to different lands and said, hey, you are going to work the fields, you are going to work and build our country for us and be our slaves, and we are going to own you and do whatever we want with you. So as much as that is a heavy topic to bring up, especially to bring up,
Yo, it's been a heavy topic.
it's a heavy topic, but you're bringing it up in my classroom now. I'm bringing that up with no white students in my classroom, and then I'll have my marginalized students or my black students, my Indian students, Guyanese students walk out the classroom, and then you can get that, okay, first white person I see is like, oh, this is your fault.
Yeah.
You're the reason why we are this way. And it's to now take that step back and say, okay, it's not his fault, like the person in the hallway. It's the power structure, the power dynamic that's been set up in society that we are looking at. And that might be the thing that is wrong. And it's just for us to get into a place where we are accepting of the fact that, hey, what has happened is wrong. And now how do we move forward? And the only way that we can move forward is to make all the people that are on the top be aware that, hey, you're on top, but you're on top for some really wrong reasons. And have them sit in that and say, okay, now how can I be an ally for the people that are under me?
Yeah, and that was the next question I was going to ask. So like for both of you, Alyssa and Andre, like, do you find like the white students are a lot more down to be allies, a lot more woke and embracing the idea of white privilege than kind of like their older white counterparts, the teachers?
I would say so. And I think the way that we kind of bring them in, we always have this idea of bringing students safely in and safely out of conversations. So it's never dropping these bombs and kind of leaving them kind of like, hey, think about that, mic drop, and I'm out. We definitely...
Start of the class as opposed to end of the class.
Get to math.
Right? We scaffold everything. We really bring it down to a level where we're not just talking about, again, whiteness itself. We're talking about imbalances of power. We're looking at prejudice over time. We're looking at how we can make change. So again, I think for both of us, the underlying message is always, well, then how do we make change? So yes, this exists, and I'm not going to shy away from saying who did this and what the implications are, but then how do we move forward? But the other thing that I wanted to add is that I don't look at things in kind of this past tense, like this happened. This is still happening.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate that, and how do we ensure that we are all kind of helping each other rise?
So
Speaking of helping each other rise.
yeah, and I was going to say, that ties into, we did an episode on the report, We Rise Together.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys had a chance to listen to it, but, one of the I'll say Darnell's biggest point, if I remember correctly, was his kind of concern or focus that we need to empower the individual to go, as much as you might have roadblocks or barriers, like it comes down to you at the end of the day, right? You can expound your point, because I'm probably...
Yeah, no, it was close, but so we went through the report. That was episode 48, We Rise Together. And the issue was on the stats. Well, I have it here. Where is it? We Rise. Okay, yeah, so We Rise Together. And so the thing that stuck out about the report was who was doing well. And it has a stat that says that, so there's 48% engaged successful students, and then 36 disengaged, and then 16% mixed. So I'm not the math guy, you're the math guy, but it works out. I think you said it was 50% that are engaged, and the other 50 weren't. And so again, like my heart was, I was the black kid who didn't do well in school. For a very long time. That was funny. But just looking at it, so my heart definitely goes out to the male students in this report, because I was once there. And so the thing that stuck out to me was looking at my experience, and part of the reason why I struggled was because of my home situation. And so what I was saying was that I wish the report covered what was happening at home, because for me, philosophically, I believe that education starts at home and not school, and ends in the home and not school. Teachers can only do so much, and because even like the limits that's put on teachers today, they can't do as much as the teachers used to do for me back when I was in school, where
You
they
mean
can
no rulers across the hand.
Yeah, well, no, not just that, but even being able to do like remedial, and teachers to spend more time with me. But at the end of the day, I thought it was very important to, when looking at the success of students, is still mom and dad still play a role in making a home that's helpful for learning.
Yeah. So, I mean, now I'm remembering what we really talked about, or what, with the 50%, we were kind of critical of the study, saying like, okay, well, what's different about the 50% who are succeeding? What are the successful students? Like, why are they succeeding? If all the students are facing the same difficulties, roughly speaking, especially if we're going to, let's say chalk some of it up to race and racism and the difficulties there.
Sorry, Joel, and I'll also add that, because part of it was like, I wasn't saying that there wasn't racism or that there aren't teachers that are mistreating black students.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, but in that context, why are the successful students successful? The study almost focused on kind of identifying the experience, with regards to good and bad and disengaged and not engaged, without kind of saying, okay, well, the good students, here's what's different about them compared to the students who are not engaged.
I think your stronger students, instead of your good versus bad students, your stronger students, this is a teacher in me, are going to be successful regardless, right? These are your students who are going to buy into the system,
For sure.
Meaning whatever material is presented in front of them, whether Eurocentric, whether very standardized, will succeed because it's just kind of innate in who they are. They're intrinsically motivated and they want to kind of succeed. Not that your others don't, but when you have students who are disengaged, it is oftentimes, and again, I go back to being culturally responsive, that the material and the ways that they're learning. So we talked about curriculum development and kind of implementation in one of our episodes. It's that idea that they're not being hooked. So it's not that this gap kind of exists on a spectrum. You have kids who are doing really well and you have kids who are doing really poorly. So there's not even really this group in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, like while our stronger students are succeeding, they're going to continue to exceed expectations regardless. But your students who are struggling are the ones that need the help. And that's why the focus is on how do we improve so that all of our students
well, and I think that's where it comes back to Darnell's point that to some extent what you've just said presumes, right? Like their characters. Whereas I would go to like the nature versus nurture, and Darnell's point of like, how much does home life even play a factor with the fact that they're engaged or not, which then leads to them being a stronger student. Whether it's, as you said, some lesson plans are more standardized, some are more, abstract, let's call it. And so some students engage and some don't. And so Darnell's question of like, well, what's different about those students? Like it could just chalk up to, skill set versus, one of the things that I know for me, or that I've learned recently is this idea of like fast processor versus slow processor. So you might have some students who, I'll use math as an example because it applies to me. It's like I used to be able to watch the teacher halfway through the problem. I start answering it myself on the side.
Okay.
And that's just because I could process.
That's very geeky of you, but go ahead.
But like I could process things on the fly in a way that, that's just a skill that I had. And so, that makes me more engaged because I know what's going. I can know what's going on, as opposed to someone who, let's say, is a lot slower processor, has to copy the entire thing down and then study it later to
go
get
back
it.
Home and study
right? And so I can see how there's scenarios where inherent skill plays a role in how engaged they are. But I think there's an aspect of, let's just use the term discipline, where you're like, okay, I'm in school, I need to focus. This is my job, my responsibility, and so I need. And I think that comes from the home life. It's not an inherent skill, because I know for me, I gotta work to be disciplined. I don't know about you.
I was gonna say, for some students, yes, it could be the home life. It could be like things are happening at home that are just distracting them from coming to school. But there's a lot of students even now in middle school that have checked out. They come to school, they don't see themselves in school, they don't see themselves in the work that they're doing, they don't see themselves in the books that they're reading. The material that we go through, it doesn't portray anything to them. So now you have these kids that are solely coming to school to interact with their friends, solely coming to school because of sports. They're
Girls.
solely coming to school for
You guys
girls.
are the worst.
Showing up the kicks. Showing up the kicks.
Right? That is now their motivation, and now they're going to use that motivation just to get them through the next 6, 7, 4 years, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So in talking of that point of like, what was I going to say? There's something that you mentioned along the lines of, okay, like how do we judge these students that are doing well, or why?
No, hold on, wait, sorry, just make sure
Yeah.
that we're in the right context. So, we rise together. The sample size was 87 students, so it was 87 black males. So the context, just to give context to the listener, that the percentages were, these are all black males. So there was the 48% are black males that are doing well, and then the other half are those who aren't doing well, and then the other 16 was mixed.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we, or at least me, I'm like, you know, I took stats as like electives in university because I'm a math. So like, I look at that study and go, okay, where's your control group, right? Like, you know, why not have a similar number of black females? Why not have, you know, same school, let's call it the control group? Like, how do they compare with that level of engagement? Because until you know let's call it true dispersion, how is, like, you know, if the level of engagement for, let's say, non-black, like not just go white, like non-black is 75-25, okay, that's a telling factor. But if it's also 50-50, well, then some of your recommendations aren't even relevant. They're actually, what I mean by not relevant, they're not relevant because they need to apply to everybody. They don't need to just apply to that subsection of students.
I think for this study as a whole, I think the focus was they were trying to just look at these black kids because they noticed that the problem was there. So when they looked at their Peel stats to say, like, okay, which kids are dropping out, which kids aren't doing well.
Yeah, and I would like to point out that this, yes, while the We Rise has a small sample, it's based off of larger studies that were done in the TDSB, so the Toronto District School Board. It's based off of the Stephen Lewis report that was actually written in 1992. So the funny thing is if you read that report, if you pull up that report at any time, it sounds like it was written today. Like, that's how, yes, it was written in 1992. I go through that and I'm like, yep, those are our students right now. And so it's based on research as well. So for your statisticians and your statisticians, what is the word? I can't even speak. Whatever. I don't do math.
That works.
For all of your research-based people, go look at the studies that have gone before and kind of go in, that are in line with them. So there was a study on black teachers, because part of the We Rise Together report is talking about like the need for representation in terms of the teaching bodies in the classroom. And there is a teacher diversity gap. So that's real.
And so this is where I was saying, like, good statistics are so fundamental to this, because the idea of a control group. Okay, so how does that 87? Okay, 87 is a small enough sample that, you know, some of the things I'm challenging, you would need to increase the sample size. But okay, for the students who have the same race teacher, does that change? If the answer is no, the question just is why. It doesn't mean that tells me the answer is, oh, race of your teachers are relevant. It would just say, like, okay, well, why did it not matter? Oh, maybe it's because this is the first out of 6 years that they had a teacher of the same race. Okay, so, like, again, I'm just throwing questions out there with a potential solution that doesn't hold it in one direction or the other. But the point being is, if you're trying to take a sample of 87 students to then make recommendations on how to rectify, my challenge is I need to know why they're different, not just the outcomes are different. Like, there's so many input factors that result in those outcomes.
And I think the part that you guys missed that we, I guess, were included in as part of our, maybe not training, but like our staff meetings and things like that, they created a video. They interviewed these students. They talked about their experiences and the things that were happening to them in school. And it wasn't just the ones who weren't doing well. The ones who were really successful were speaking about things like, yes, I'm successful, but in spite of. So again, I am not necessarily a numbers and facts kind of girl. I'm an emotions-based person, and I'm an experiential person. So when I hear my students, and again, we have more experience because we're dealing with these kids day to day, we get to hear those sound bites. We're hearing those stories of discrimination. We're hearing those inequities in practice. Like, as Black teachers, we're watching it happen. So I don't need a sample group in this to tell me what I've experienced. But that's, you do.
No, but I'm not saying about experience. I'm talking about change, right? I'm talking about the prospective, not the retrospective. The retrospective, of course, like what you're saying, what they're experiencing, you know, I would say there is an aspect of how often do we misinterpret other people, right? Like I've said this on the podcast recently. The worst thing you can do is interpret someone else's behavior through your lens. Meaning, why were they're motivated because if I did that, I would have done it for this reason, right? And so there's an aspect of, experience is biased because you're interpreting someone else's behavior as if you did it most of the time. You almost have to train yourself not to do that, to try to put yourself in their person's shoes. So that's one aspect where I would say, yeah, experience matters, but it can also be dramatically false because of your misconceptions. So
then my question for you guys is, what is it that you would like to see out of the We Rise report that would make you feel comfortable in trusting, I guess, what it's putting forth? Or what are the shortfalls and limitations that you are seeing from an outsider's perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Just to add to that is the other side that might be missing here is because, again, and sorry, probably why we're here today is that we're giving you that inside look into the school, right? So for this document, you guys being the public saw it as a document, and now you're addressing and picking apart and pulling at the minute things or the grander things that are inside of the document, whereas we are the teachers who now have to take the document and work the document into our lessons, work the document into our professional development that we do.
Because I'm one day I'll be with you guys, so hopefully, Lord willing, soon. So I'm in the process of becoming a teacher and a teacher's college. So I'm looking forward to it. And I always make jokes on the podcast like, yo, man, I hope, when I go for my interview process, these guys aren't pulling up my podcast and listening to it. Some of the comments that I made. So, one day, Lord willing, I hope to be a teacher and be amongst you guys. And again, so that's why when I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, so when I get into the field, this is what I'm probably going to be dealing with. And now, again, like I said before, as a black male who's gone through the system and struggled through the system, my whole expectation was like, okay, I have a heart for these kids because I was once there. And so I guess part of it is for me, I can only talk about my experience and why I was doing bad. And I was doing bad because my home situation was not helpful. As much as my mom and dad loved me and they tried their best, they weren't equipped to help me become a better student. But then again, I had other black friends who did really well in school. And it was clear because, their situation was different than mine. But again, like I'm not a numbers guy. But I have been studying economics and really looking at understanding, why things happen. And so so it's very concerning when you're seeing, black students disgruntled. And my question was just more so, what are some solutions and what are we comparing it to, and really pushing the envelope of things that might have been overlooked, like the kids who are doing well, and besides their innate ability to want to do well, how was mom being helpful? How was dad being helpful? Because again, when you look at this report, and we haven't even talked about it yet, and really do we, but like this isn't just a black problem, but this is a black male problem, not a black female. Yeah, that's the focus. Because if it's a black female problem, then we give female solutions for females. Men and women are not the same. Like boys are different, right? Because boys do crazy stuff. We're not,
do I touch it? I'm not going to.
we're boys are different, girls are different. And so I was really looking for a male specific solution. And so when I don't see proper solutions, it just kind of gets me mad, where I'm like, okay, like I really want to help these kids. I really want to see these boys do well. So I didn't really see that in the report, but
I think too, that comes with experience. So again, this report that I'm looking at right now, and I'm looking at like kind of our one pager fact sheet, the what, why, what's happening.
Of what? Sorry, what was it?
The We Rise Together.
Okay,
so if you go to werisetogether.ca, it has all of the reports there, and it has like one pagers that kind of give you an idea of what this is and why it was put forth. And while the recommendations don't sound very specific, you have to understand that as schools, we are doing PD sessions where we are tackling this document, unpacking it, coming up with solutions, coming up with actual tangible things that are going to happen in the classroom. Two of my colleagues and I did this last year for a PD session, and we unpacked everything from the research that preceded this document to the document itself to what you could bring into the classroom. So this document is just like any other document. Like if you've looked at a curriculum document, you know that thing is like, do this, like teach measurement. And then you're like, oh, okay, sure. How? Yeah. It doesn't tell you how.
I was talking about that on one of the podcasts. You're like, it was so like, it's such a simple measurement sort of directive.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying. Like this document, as much as you guys are the public and are maybe even scrutinizing the document is made for us to unpack, just like the curriculum document is made for. It's there for you to read and say, okay, like the curriculum, read it and you'll say, okay, by the end of grade 6, my son should know this in measurement. I now have to take that and say, okay, what am I going to teach?
So I would say, for me, kind of being more stats oriented, right? There's this idea within statistics called cause and effect. But then also correlation doesn't equal causation. And so that's where, to me, I go to control groups. I go to those ideas because what I would say for the most part, the study has laid out dispersity and outcome without trying to delimitate factors that cause those outcomes. And so that's where, we want to produce solutions to the bad outcomes. But if I don't have a really thorough understanding of the cause, you're just throwing dirt at the wall and hoping it sticks.
Okay. And then to that, I would say, as a Black woman and someone who has experienced a ton of different things in school, I look at this document and I think to myself, thank goodness for this document, even though to you guys it doesn't look like much. But this
we said it was a good starting point.
Yeah, but this is stuff that we have needed for some time. And truthfully, I don't necessarily care how it came to be that they came to the conclusion that these things needed to happen, because they did need to happen. Like,
so I'm not disagreeing.
Anti-Black, can I just read this?
Yeah, I just want to say we're not disagreeing that these things necessarily need to be addressed.
Yeah.
That's not our place of disagreement. So like when we did the whole episode on that, we were like, this is a great identifier of issues and showing this like problems that need to be addressed. So that's where we went, okay, that's great. But now the prospective actions is where we took issue because, again, I go back to cause and effect. So,
but you need more. But my thing is that the average person listening to this is going to hear, this is not enough, right? Like, I need more. And the reason, like, they didn't do enough research, thus it's invalid. That's not what you said, but I fear that the average person listening to this is going to be like, yeah, you're right. They only sampled 87 students, so it can't be valid.
Good enough,
yeah, it's not. And I don't want people, like, I want people to understand that, like, this document is saying deliver anti-Black racism and bias awareness professional development. It is telling boards to have training for their staff, like, so that way they understand what's happening in the lives of others. And yes, that's not, just for those Black males, but it's necessary. Like, and so yes, 87 students doesn't sound like a lot, but if it got me this, I'm okay with that.
So I would say, do we have a cause and effect relationship in the document that demonstrates its racism?
Sorry, what do you mean by that? You lost me.
So going back to cause and effect, right? We know that there's an unequal outcome based on race. Do we know race is the factor, or is there a common cause, right? Meaning, and I'll use some hyperbole to make my point, right? If you have, all the Black students you sampled were of single parent homes, as opposed to the rest of the population is, 2-parent homes, there's a potential that the common cause is single parentness, right? It's just a dispersity in single parentness, both in the Black community and in the outcome of
Yeah.
grades.
Yeah, but even then, not all black homes are single.
No,
parent homes.
that's why I said I used hyperbole. I'm
And-
trying to use extreme example.
But that's when you give your example, sometimes I get lost, man. So yeah,
But at the same time, you just heard Darnell say from his personal experience that he had his mother and his father at home, and school still sucked for him, right? So,
but my point though is like, do we have something to demonstrate racism is the cause, or have we presumed it because there's racial disparity?
Okay, so one of the things in the report says under the why of why this report kind of came to be, unchallenged name calling by peers, including the use of the N-word, meaning students have been called the N-word at school and nobody stopped it. So teachers heard it, but didn't know how to address it and stop the behavior.
So that's where I would say, like, the document is great at saying, okay, this is something that needs to stop. But I would also say, the document doesn't necessarily demonstrate that leads to the unequal outcome.
I get what you're saying. Like, I totally understand that you need proof.
Well, it's not so much that I need proof. It's this idea of like, if we're going to spend, let's say $10 million, I know that's not the budget, but like if we're going to spend $10 million to implement all of these things, and the goal is to change outcomes in grades, but all it does is not but all it does is, or all it does is not what I want to say. What it does is change the culture of the school, which is great. But if the objective was to improve grades and it doesn't do that, then
but
that's
it's
not. It's the experience.
Yeah, because part of it is
it's not read the report, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I was saying, like, it's that's part where I can agree. Like, these things need to stop. The experiences need to improve. But for me, this all orientated out of unequal outcome in grades.
But
yeah, well, it's okay.
Grades are based on like more than, and again, this is what you don't see being out of the classroom. I feel like this is why I get frustrated, because this is the public saying, if you just did this, this would happen, or I need to see this in order for this to happen. But we live in an experiential society, in an experiential era of schooling where my job is, yes, to teach little whoever 1 + 1 = 2, but it is to make that student love being at school enough to continue coming and to continue learning regardless of what's happening.
Or even to remember what they've learned.
Yeah, so what it is, it says, We Rise Together is an intervention plan and comprehensive response to the educational experiences of Black students in the Peel Board. It says nothing about improving their grades. We just want them to love school enough to want to be there, because that's what we were finding, that students did not even want to come to school anymore. So yes, from the outside, we want to see grades improvement. Like, that's from a parental and a societal standpoint, because meritocracy is king, right? Like, we want to see grades equal success. But for me as a teacher, and this has always been kind of my background, is that a love of learning, that's it for me. Like,
so that's where I'll go back to your show for 1 minute, total sidebar. But like, I really appreciated, within your podcast, there's an aspect of teaching people to learn, or teaching people how to learn, right? Absolutely. So there was two things that I thought that comments that you guys made that resonated with me. One was kind of, you made something like, we use the term, I don't know, let's go find out.
Yeah.
Right. And so demonstrating how to find out, how to learn for yourself and how to teach yourself is something that I think for the most part has been absent from our school system. And the second was the comment, I don't remember who said it, but recognizing there's a need to change the role of school from teaching people to be employees to be employers. Yeah. And I would change employer to entrepreneur.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hold on. Yeah. Well, that's the libertarian side of Joel speaking.
Well, no, but that's entrepreneur.
I
same
said that.
thing.
I definitely was the one who said it.
So I'm resonating with what
But
they said.
I do agree. Not that employees are bad or not useful, but I want to change the mindset. So you can be an employer. I'm an employee.
For sure.
But my mindset is different, and I approach things from a larger, grander scale of thinking. It's not just whatever so and so says is what I do.
Yeah, I just don't want to go down that road and get Joel started.
Yeah. Well, and
no,
I mean,
stop. Yeah, no, because we're gonna jump into libertarianism and free market principles and teaching these kids about capitalism. So okay, but
hold on, I just want to say the one thing that's interesting about the employee side. I think it's a good point to recognize, because the true, I don't want to say true origins, but original school system structure was to teach you to be a good soldier.
The
Yeah, for sure.
industrialization
Right.
of
And
the
then
system.
good soldier transitioned into good employee, which, if for anyone who's got issues with power dynamics, really it's teaching you to be part of a hierarchy. That's it. Right. And how to follow the order of the person above you.
Absolutely.
Like as a very, underlying fundamental
Like the
approach.
government.
Well, but I mean, more so.
but more just to be a follower. And that's
Yeah.
what we're trying to break, which is what we
Which
said on the
I
podcast.
I absolutely love that you guys had that in your podcast, right? So that's where, we're kind of hashing out the We Rise Together document, and I would say, all the things you're saying about how it's being implemented, I think are good. Me as an outsider would say, again, if the goal is to improve the environment, these recommendations are good. If the goals are, therefore it will increase grades, I would say maybe. And I would say the document doesn't demonstrate that well enough to me to make that. So you guys have said,
I was gonna say I would agree with you to an extent to say like, okay, the document doesn't just because. How do I say this? Okay, let me give you an example because that's what I like to do. When I was
teacher in
teaching, when I was teaching grade 8 during what was it last year, September to December, brought a book into my classroom. Books called Ghost Boys. It's about a black student gets shot by a police officer, and now he's living this life. And he goes through the book of times where he was alive and having interactions with his peers, having interactions with bullies, his mom, his dad, and then the times where he is dead in those interactions. And then the thing that is looming in the book is, okay, how is the case for that police officer being played out? That is something that was very catching for a lot of the students. And in that classroom, I had a mix of black students, a mix of students of other ethnicities. Wow, words. And also white students in that classroom as well. And it goes to your point of, okay, now I've done what the document has said. Black student, look, this is your face. It's on the cover. You should be engaged. And I can still have black boys that are like, no, I'm not reading. I don't care. What is reading? Right. So the point behind this We Rise document is, again, the experience. How do I make it so that you like coming here? So here is not a death trap of 6 hours for you that you can
glorified babysitting.
Yes,
for the
or
parent.
that you have to survive when you get here.
Yeah.
Right? How do I make it so that you're coming to school and whatever we've put on the table to discuss or whatever the lesson is for the day, you can give your input. You can give some insight to what's going on.
Yeah.
And they can make those connections.
For sure.
Because what people don't realize, if you are looking at the brain, right, the more connections you can make to any given topic, the more synapses are firing in your brain, and the more kind of you build tunnels and pathways for knowledge. So that's why when we talk about culturally responsive teaching again, we're trying to make the most connections so that way we're improving brain function. So if you're always referring to, let's say, going wakeboarding at the cottage every summer, which I remember people talking about when I was in elementary school, and I'd be like, synapses not firing. Sorry, like I'm not making those connections. And so that's part of the bringing in of not just texts, but visual images, scenarios that your students can understand, and all of those things.
Yeah, I thought the point of the report is to show a need for pardon?
Nuance.
Not nuance, but, hiring more black male teachers.
Yes.
And so I'm like, oh, hooray. I'm like, all right, cool, So looking at it from like that perspective, in the hiring practices, I'm being told, like I said before, I'm trying to get into the teaching field, and I'm being told that, there's need for not just males, but black males to be present. And I remember how important and helpful that was for me, coming up, to see people I recognize, and talk the talk that I talk and know where I come from, and are able to relate to me in a more intimate way. And that was, and I admit that was very helpful for me in school. But can you guys kind of like explain the hiring practice? Because I know we,
It's all me.
No, I'm
joking.
Yeah,
I
like
was
the
gonna
old,
start
the
because-
old method, because like I have other teacher friends, and this is always a point of debate on old hiring practices versus the new hiring practices. So how does that work?
Okay, so I'll start just because I came up under the,
In the old school,
the
yep.
old school way, which again helped, but has also kind of hindered in some aspects, right? So no one asked for your So first, when I was hired, you were just allowed to apply to the school. They would have postings, and I applied as a nobody, right? Like I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any supply teaching experience. I was fresh out of teachers college, about 4 months maybe. And I saw a position and I was like, oh, I could do this. Applied for it and immediately like got a call, got an interview, went in and was hired like the next day. Like it was super quick. Never had to supply teach a day in my life. But I did slow down. I did one LTO, so a long-term occasional assignment. So that's the position I was hired for. So I worked from February until June for another teacher. And then I got hired permanently.
Was it by the same school?
Right after that. My permanent position was by another school because my school didn't have any positions. But had they, I would have. But yeah, very easy process for me. But limiting in the fact that I didn't have an array of experiences to draw from when I became a permanent teacher. And so Andre can speak to his experience a little more, which will give you the snapshots for everything that he's done in his short career.
Yes. So we're in a place right now where me being a teacher for 5 years versus Alyssa being a teacher for how long?
10.
10. I have more experience than her.
In terms of diversity of
I feel like that's a stretch. But you have a
joking.
variety
A
of
variety.
experiences.
Variety experiences. And
the
that
good
is
kind of diversity, in my opinion.
that is because for me, the hiring process actually really started at Teachers College. So Teachers College is wrapping up. You have your teachers telling you now, okay, you need to be applying for jobs. We're going to be having job fairs, all of that. But then at the same time telling you, hey, how I got my job was essentially on graduation day. Like I literally had one of my professors tell me on graduation day, there's principals standing outside. And when we finished, we got to walk out, and the principal that was at the school that we did our teaching practicum at, we could say, hey, do you have any jobs available? He would say, yeah, come in on Monday.
Wow.
And
But what was yours like now?
Yeah, but my experience was going through Teachers College, not applying for jobs and not really getting onto any school board until a year after Teachers College. And once I got into the PO board, so the board that I work for now, it was a lot of supplying. And to my benefit, because I'm the young black male teacher, now when I step into the school, there's a lot of eyes on me, so people notice me right off the bat. So as soon as I do something good, everybody goes, okay, he's good at what he's doing, bring him in more. And because of that, it allowed me to gain a lot of connections with different principals at
Street
different schools.
credibility.
Yeah, different schools, different principals. And my first LTO that I got was really a month. And again, an LTO being that I'm working for another teacher that may have gone on leave for some sort of situation, for either sick leave or maternity leave or something like that. So for this one, it was sick leave. It was only a month. I worked. And then my next one was another teacher that went on sick leave, so I worked again. But all of my LTOs allowed me to experience different classrooms, different settings, different courses. So
and on the show, you kind of made it, I think you were talking about the example where you're like, you go in and you're like, you got to teach something, you don't even know what's going on.
Exactly.
The first day in the classroom, it's like a trial by fire, which I definitely appreciated you talking through. I was like, oh, I never thought of that. Maybe I shouldn't have harassed my supply teachers so much.
Right? Poor supply teachers. But Andre's
we
taught
were
like
brutal to
everything.
Everything. I've taught literally kindergarten to grade 8.
Yeah, taught math,
Everything.
taught science, taught language, did an ISSP role. Like he got to kind of taste the rainbow, you know what I mean? And like experience different things. Whereas I went in as a grade 8 French teacher, and then I went in and I taught language. And so I pretty much taught language, French, gym, drama, dance, art, like kind of in that realm, but always in that realm. Whereas Andre's gotten to experience way more positions than I have.
Way more, and schools too. I've been to, I can't even count the amount of schools that I've been to just supplying for one day or doing LTOs for a couple of months or something like that in those 5 years.
So I guess this is part of one of the issues with the strike that teachers are fighting over, old versus new, is it?
It's essentially old versus new. So
which one's better? Like which one? I mean, which one are teachers preferring?
Okay, so the idea is that we are right now in a fair and transparent hiring practices kind of deal. Meaning, if you have been supplying for X amount of years or whatever it is, you build seniority, right? Because you've had that experience in the classroom. And so when interview time comes up for that long-term position, then you get moved to that position. So it's kind of like moving from old driving to new driving, where you could just get your license right away. Now we're asking you to do a graduated system where you learn G2, as you go, because teachers college teaches you nothing. And I apologize, but you learn nothing in your Bachelor of Education program. Everything you learn about teaching, you learn in the classroom. So to have all those experiences that Andre had only made him a better teacher. And so this graduated system that we're in now is kind of that fair and transparent hiring practice that we're talking about.
Okay, so just to one of the things I've known from teacher friends, one of the examples is though you go, a school needs to hire a teacher. My understanding is they're given the list. Here's who you hire from.
Yeah, so essentially how it works
is... I would say the counter argument to that is, what if they all suck?
So essentially how it works is job posting goes out if you are on the LTO list, so meaning that you have gone through 2 hiring processes. So you've done an interview to get onto the board of your choice, and now you've supplied for at least 10 months. And now you are now qualified to now get another interview to end up on the LTO list. Once you are on the LTO list, so if you're successful, you end up on the LTO list. When jobs come out, so when LTOs come out, you can apply for those LTOs or those permanent positions. And based on your seniority number, essentially what happens is everybody who's applied gets put on a list with their number beside it. Top 5 numbers are the ones who get interviews.
And with that said, it's not like a total move from meritocracy because, again, like Andre said, you have to interview for each of those stages. So if you have been supplying for 10 years, which is,
I know someone.
Yeah, if that's your thing, if you're supplying for 10 years and then you would decide to apply to the LTO list, there's no guarantee that just because you've been supplying for 10 years, you're making it onto that list.
For sure.
So you always kind of have to interview for the next stage.
But you could say you can make it through those. Enough people fake it till they make it, right? And to some extent,
a lot of people,
right? So this is, and I would say, okay, the good side of this is we're taking, or to your point, the fair and transparent. I was going to say something. What's the word? But the good side of the fair and transparent is you're eliminating people getting hired purely on relationships.
Yes,
nepotism is real.
But arguably, you're also now preventing let's call it the top from becoming teachers sooner, which I would argue is hindering the true benefactors being the students, right? If you have good teachers like yourself, probably stuck in PTO list as opposed to being full-time because of this structure, that would be a counter to why this is a good option.
Yeah, it's funny when I think about it now, it's even one day I'll be in that position, but part of it is you thinking about talent wise, talented teachers like yourselves, and then you have older guys who aren't as talented as you are, and it almost
the downfall of seniority is where you're going with
no
this,
well yeah so downfall of seniority or maybe tenure or unions, I don't know, but it's kind of you see it's kind of like the same thing in the NBA, right? With the kids jumping straight from high school. At some point, the players union agreed to say, okay, let's keep these guys out, because at some point, the kids from high school, there was a lot more after Kobe. A lot of kids were jumping. A lot of guys were even actually getting drafted.
The
and it was
30-year-old plus in the NBA is no, we got to cut this back because I'm losing my job.
Yeah, well, and then
I'm losing my minutes.
Yeah, and it just comes back to job. And again, like you said, like meritocracy and stuff like that. Because for a guy like me, well, I look at it like this, man. I love kids. I love students. I love that atmosphere. and I'm hungry, you know, and I'm a very competitive, hungry, animated person. So like this kind of makes me mad because I'm like, oh wait, now I gotta wait my turn, and I can't just come down and kick down the door.
That's what I was gonna. The point I was going to make is that I don't
Hire me.
I don't want to make it seem like this new system takes away from building relationships. Building relationships is
building relationships in what way?
If you are a teacher trying to get a permanent or an LTO position, building relationships with those hiring principals.
With admin, yeah.
With admin, it goes a long way. And my example of that, because I am Mr. Storyman, is when I had my interview for my LTO, it happened at our board office. And essentially how that process works is everybody who's getting interviewed is there in the room. And there's about, I want to say maybe 20 principals. And they work in pairs, and they interview these different teachers until the end of the day. So when I had my interview was early in the morning. Principals are still having breakfast, and we're all sitting in the room. As all of the principals walk out, again, from my experience of me going around to these different schools, I had about 10 principals say, "Hey, Andre, you're here."
Hey, yo, what's up, man? Yo, I'm good, man.
Right?
You good?
And then and you could start to see the other principals kind of like, oh, who's that? Yeah. Why do you know him? Why do you know him?
And that's my man.
and it, again, from me building those relationships and people seeing that I'm good at what I'm doing, that I'm legit. Now, when I walk into that interview, and we talk about it on the podcast as well, as much
unplanned references.
Yeah, not only unplanned references, but the fact that for me, I try to stay humble. So
Lies.
He said, try.
So when it comes to the hiring process and those interviews and having to talk about yourself and all the good that you do, I stumble sometimes. Mm-hmm. And what I usually do to end off those interviews is like, okay, I know maybe I didn't say the buzzwords that you were looking for, maybe I didn't answer the questions that you were looking for. Call my references. Go talk to those 9
It's
people.
a threat.
Yeah.
No, because there's I know a lot of teachers, and there's a lot of teachers that are out there that, again, know how to play the game. They know how to say the right thing, and now they get into the position, but they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do what I do.
They're going to be better in the interview, but they're not going to be better in the classroom.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and this is where, I would say in my world of, I'm in finance, accounting, I've seen more and more, there's this idea of, having a diverse pool of candidates. And part of that, it's not about, trying to make sure we meet, there's an aspect of like, okay, if we lack diversity, what's the cause? Figure it out. But it's also not what I've appreciated lately. I'm hearing more conversations about how do we make sure we open up our candidate pool so that we're not excluding good people just because of, whether we're using weird buzzwords that one demographic wouldn't use, or, we're asking for something that would exclude a whole bunch of people that we actually want to include, right? So maybe you're saying, oh, you need 5 years experience in this type of role when, well, because of, let's say, historically speaking, a certain demographic hasn't got that senior executive role. Are we potentially excluding candidates who are qualified? And so where I take somewhat issue with this is kind of going like, okay, by just limiting to 5 candidates who, are on the seniority list, now all the things you've said about relationships are important, but you're almost getting pushed down the list based on what's the higher quality positions
talent pool
are going to be all the highest seniority people applying every single
and
time.
there are definite limitations to this. Like, don't get us
Yes.
wrong.
Yeah.
We understand that this is not a perfect system by any means. Like, Andre should have had a job
a long time ago.
And that's unfortunate that he had to wait this long.
Yeah.
And that's why
I'm torn.
what about the, like we haven't really talked about it. What about the seniority tenure side of it? That's, I think it's related where you've got teachers who should no longer be teaching, who arguably can't get fired.
Yeah. Well, okay. Just before we get to all that, because this is just one aspect of many that's on the table for the strike issue.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So just we'll give you guys time to like kind of point out what the issues are, because there's parents at home sitting, with their kids at home, annoying them, saying like, you should be with Andre right now.
Yeah. Why aren't you at school?
Yeah. Why'd you at school, man? Yo.
So how is the seniority part playing into the strike or the asks? Is it at all? I mean, we've talked about it a bit. Is that where you're?
No, that's what I was gonna say. I was just gonna say like just for you guys to
List off the points.
Yeah, just list off the points.
Okay, do you want me to list off and then you can elaborate?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, these are in no particular order, but special education needs to be appropriately funded. So that's kind of the first bit.
Unpack special education.
So what special education is essentially our students that are in need of extra help, whether they have or are whether their challenges that they have an LD, which is
Learning disability.
Thank you, which is a learning disability, or maybe they just lack that attention and focus that some of our other students have.
Or there's physical limitations as well. Like look at our developmentally delayed program.
Yes.
I mean, you also have Section 23,
Yes.
which my wife was a part of. So
Okay.
I'm
So,
familiar with that.
so she'll resonate with the second point that's coming up then, which is
Classroom violence needs
Yes.
to be addressed. So again, we in particular have not had these individually for us. So I can't speak to experiences from me, but I've seen teachers now wearing like body armor, which is weird, like wearing vests and wearing like they
Enough
were
for
saying,
stuff.
when
yeah, like my students are abusing me.
Yes.
Like they're getting scratched and kicked and punched. And the solution was gloves, like high gloves. So that way they weren't getting scratched on their arms, and body armor. Like, again,
like
I don't want
there's
to make it
a-
seem like it's medieval times, but
no. There's from working as an EA, I know EA in high school, so educational assistant.
you're
so
right.
it's
Executive.
essentially the same
Similar
as a
to
TA,
Section 23.
right? So there's essentially a sweater that you can say, like a zip up sweater that has literally padding in the arms, has padding in the chest, because you're dealing with students that can act in violent manners, and it's to protect yourself. For me, it was me in those developmentally delayed classrooms dealing with high school students. So now you have students that are nonverbal autistic that get upset, and their
Violence
thing
is
is
just
we're gonna lash out. But
Yeah.
again, you're a high school student. You're in grade 12. It doesn't matter that you don't know how to communicate. You're in grade 12. You're strong.
Yeah.
You punch a tiny 5'3" teacher, you can lay her out or lay him out.
Yeah.
Right. So you have this going on in not only in high schools, but you have it happening in kindergarten classrooms as well.
Yeah, so we need kind of those two, like the special education and the classroom violence. They're kind of linked together in terms of having supports in the classroom. So when you're eliminating your educational assistants and all of those supports that are put in place, you're leaving teachers stranded. And it's hard enough to just educate a class, never mind having to deal with everything else that you're dealing with. And I think that's the piece that people miss. They think that we're just there to teach ABC 1, 2, 3, but you don't realize that, like, I'm sitting in my class during my planning time and kids are asking me, you know, Mrs. Gray, can I make an appointment with you? I just need to talk. Or like, my life is falling apart. Or even worse, like I've had kids come to me, I am thinking about killing myself. Like we then have
Not
to,
just thinking, have tried.
I have tried to,
I've
like,
tried.
I literally have had to, since I became assist trained, so that's suicide prevention, and you are literally getting students to come down off of the I want to kill myself, off of the ledge. And after I did that training, I've already had to have done, I've already done, I can't even speak, 2 or 3 assists where I had to talk kids down. So like, it is more than just teaching.
Yes.
And I use that in air quotes.
Yeah, I mean, would I be wrong to say that to some extent there's an aspect of just acknowledgement that there's resource needed for these particular problems?
We just need support.
And that's just the first 2 points that we covered. The other
Yeah.
one.
That's 2 out of 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep going.
So maintaining kindergarten. So if we are those glorified babysitters that everyone keeps saying we are, don't you want your kindergarten babysitters to be there? Like,
sure.
I'm like, taking away full day kindergarten is not only going to present a problem for the teachers in those positions, but think about parents. Now you're moving to half day. You're going back to half day kindergarten and then half day daycare. So you're paying for daycare.
And then over flooding the daycare system again.
Yeah, like there's just a lot. Like having full day kindergarten is not only beneficial for parents, it's beneficial for children. Like in having those kind of social groups and learning how to navigate other people. Like I have 4 kids, but 3 of my kids are young, like 6, 4, and 3. And kindergarten is fantastic. Like, they need to learn how to socialize with other people and learn how to put things away when they're finished and learn share and routines and understanding, like, you know, here we get to, this is what a circle is. Sit in a circle. Like, let's sing some songs. Like, all of those things that seem minute and irrelevant are so beneficial to those synapses, right?
I was going to say, there's teachers that even push, kindergarten teachers that push that envelope even farther, where you have, well, they'll notice they're having those interactions with their students. They notice, okay, they want to learn about this. Let me go and research this. Let me bring this into the classroom. I've seen it countless times where kindergarten kids are playing outside. Kid finds a ladybug, and all of a sudden the next day or 2 days later, the TA and the teacher have started a whole ladybug lesson.
Right? Like, and then they're building things and crafting ladybug wings for their students that they probably purchased the supplies with their own money.
Exactly.
And there's just, I feel like too often, especially in times of you know, labor disputes, teachers are vilified to the nth degree. Like, everyone's like, what do you even do all day? Like,
yeah, you get paid in the summertime.
Yeah, like,
what do you do?
Gosh, it's frustrating. But, and again, just like in any profession, you are going to have teachers who are not doing what you would like them to do. But, like, for the most part, we are here for these students. And that's a big point that I feel like people are missing. Like, we love what we do. I genuinely love teaching. As much as they drive me crazy, and sometimes I'm like, everybody don't speak. I love what I do. So yeah, those are the first 3. Fourth was that hiring, fair and transparent hiring practices are maintained. So we talked a bit about that. And then class sizes that meet student needs. So our Minister of Education right now is a private school baby. Not that there's anything wrong with private school, but private schools boast having smaller class sizes. Like, that's the draw to come to private school. Like, get this one-on-one attention. Only 6-to-1 in a classroom, like 6 students, 1 teacher. If that wasn't important, why would they boast those things? You know what I mean?
They do it.
Well, but I mean, you could argue it's just marketing.
No, but they do it in universities too, where they say, hey, come to this university because you're not going to be just a number. There's going to be relationship with you and your prof. That's what one of the things that got me to go to Guelph Humber.
You can make that presentation. The question of, like, does that represent the reality is a different.
Absolutely. As a teacher on the inside,
it does.
100%. Having a class of 6 students, or even having a class of 20. So my original homeroom this year had 19 students. All of the things I could do in that classroom were insane. I knew those kids in a month before reorganization happened for us so well, because there was only 20 of them, and it was easy to make those connections and have that one-on-one time and sit with them, and the other kids maybe let them work in small groups. In a class, his grade 8 class that he was originally in, I have them for French right now. There are 28, 29 of them.
29.
It feels like that Simpsons meme where, like, the kids are sitting on top of each other in, like, this long building, like, desk contraption. That's what it feels like when they're in my room. I'm like, who are you? Like, what is happening? 28. Where are we? And that's only 28, right? Like, only, again,
like, in my 2 grade 7 classes right now, I have one that has 27 and the other one has 25 in it. And again, it's that if we are driving, or we are trying to be teachers that are building off of experience and making sure that our students are staying engaged with the experience that they're having in our classroom, it becomes very difficult to do so when you have more and more and more students in the classroom.
And just to, like, bring this down to, like, a fundamental, like, anyone who has kids can understand this. Have you ever hosted a kid's birthday party and been in, like, a play place for 2 hours with 10 kids?
That's why I don't go.
Nightmare. Again, with my kids, like, no, I have, like, whatever it is, 15 5-year-olds in a place, and I'm like, all right, we're done here. Like, thank you, no thanks. That's a lot. Now imagine having to try and teach them when all they want to do is be up and moving. And when we're talking about class sizes, understand that those classrooms, including the ones that have learning disabilities or learning challenges and that are physical disabilities, they are taken into that class average size. So when we're talking about moving the class average size up to whatever it is, 27, 28, 30, you're taking into account those small classes of 4 students, 5 students, 12 students that are in those learning disability classes. So if you're looking at the average class size for a traditional classroom, you're really pushing the limits here because you have this really low end that people haven't accounted for because they're only thinking, 25 plus 30, divide that down the middle, that's your average. No, your average includes those little classes.
You know, the other side of the equation obviously is going to give you statistics in the way that's most favorable to them, right? And I mean, so did we cover all the points? Because
No, I think there's one
and then
more.
the last one is the one that everyone's angry about is compensation that keeps up with inflation. So we're not asking for anything more than we have right now. Just let us stay where we are.
Oh, let her finish. Let her finish. Let her finish. Let her finish.
I was going to say,
Oh, no,
I've worked for the city of Mississauga,
Yes.
and then I've also worked, you know, in nonprofit area. And one of the things like that I found is perceived potentially, and I don't know if this is the case for you, so you can speak to it or not. But while working for the city of Mississauga, there's no such thing as a bonus. But you have two types of raises. You have inflation-based raise, and you also have performance-based raise. And the argument is, oh, you're going to get a performance raise, but not a bonus. And I would say for the taxpayer, that's actually worse off because now that's the performance raise is ingrained in your now you get that every year. That's your new base. And so whereas like in the nonprofit world, essentially I'm getting a bonus for 1 year on my performance, and then except my new job doesn't have that, but that's different. But then I'm getting an inflation-based adjustment. So inflation-based adjustment means cumulatively I'm only getting 1.5% to 2% every year.
Exactly.
But if you're getting a performance-based on top of that, now you're looking at 3.5% to 5%. And what I have found, that is unique to government-funded roles as opposed because there's this demonization of bonuses as being a bad thing. But in reality, I would argue it rewards you for a one-time performance, not rewards you. You don't get future benefit of that one good year. So how does that, factor into how do raises work, besides just the inflation side, bonuses, those kind of things?
I think, again, this is when those numbers get skewed and people start thinking, oh, you all make $100K a year. Whoa. Nope, not even close. We're looking at averages, right? And so when you start off in teaching, you are making pennies. And when I say pennies, I'm not even exaggerating because let's say you finish your degree, you finished your undergraduate degree, that's 4 years of education. Then you've done a 2-year teacher education program that you now come out with a Master of Teaching. So professional studies, you walk into your teaching career and we have a grid for our payment or for our salaries. So you can go across the grid and up the grid or down the grid, however you want to look at it. You start kind of somewhere in the middle with that master's, but baseline, year 0. So years of experience, you kind of go up. Year 0, I don't even know what it is now, but when I started, it was like $35,000 a year.
Which, to be honest, if you look at a lot of professions, isn't pennies.
But it is when you start taking out all of the things that they've taken out, and not just regular, because again, everyone looks at their salaries and they're like, oh yeah, this sucks. Like taxes suck. Yes, taxes suck. We all pay taxes. However, the thing that people are mad about, oh, you have this great pension. Yeah, I pay into my pension. Like
that's why it's
dollar
great.
for dollar with the government. So we have a teacher pension that we pay into and CPP. So while most people are just getting their CPP taken out,
I would say most employers, whether it's 5 and 5, right? I contribute 5% to my RSP and they contribute 5. That's pretty common as
ours is high.
But that's because you have a pension.
Yes.
An RSP means I bear all the risk.
Yes.
The pension means you have zero risk.
Which is fine.
Right? And I would say to you, this is one thing. The only people who have defined benefits are government employees.
Yes. And
so
that is what
that's
we've
one
chosen.
thing that there's a disconnect, I would say, from the other side where I would say to you, by the time you retire, if you still have a defined benefit, I will be shocked because, you look at, this is where we can get into a bit of the dilemma here is, go back 2008, 2009 when GM was going bankrupt. The union is negotiating with GM and the company says, if you don't take this deal, we don't exist. The government doesn't have that side of the negotiation. right? And so the problem on the negotiation side is, well, the government is a organization that just continues to print money. And so, hey, how is the cost of the school system relate to its benefit? Well, we don't know because nobody is paying a price to evaluate the benefit they're receiving.
Fair. And I get where people are coming from when they're looking at our salaries and they're like, oh my goodness. But with that said, like, this is not, we are doing professional training. Like, again, this is, you have a master's at this point by the time you graduate now. And then not only that, once you go in, we are taking additional qualification courses. So those are all of the courses that can move you kind of up the grid to that level where, you know, people are like, ooh, like you're making big money. But again, those courses are like $1,000 a pop to, again, take courses in whatever it may be, guidance, spec ed, like all of the math specialist. And again, it takes years to kind of move up and move to a place where you're getting paid. But with that said, I don't understand why we are upset that the people who are educating our students are paid reasonably. Like, I'm still not understanding why the disconnect. I get that we are, like, again, I'm paying taxes too, so I'm paying my own salary. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why are we so upset that we have provided good working conditions and salaries for people who are educating youth and making them want to learn and creating this environment?
I think it, to some extent, goes back to, like, we talk about the dispersity and outcome. You got the kid who's barely passing. They're like, what do you mean I'm paying my teacher, let's just say $60,000 a year, and they can't even get my kid to pass, right? So, like, I think, and again, I'm not, you know, I'm trying to steel man the person who's critical of the wages, right? Because, and so this is where, you know, I've said this on the podcast a couple times, where I think we're going to see something like the Uberization of education, because we're, you know, you look at Uber with regards to blowing up you know, government cartel with regards to cab system, right? We're continually hitting this, like, friction point. And I would challenge, it's a bit of, well, we've got two monopolies negotiating with each other. And you know, as you made a point about the private school system boasting small class sizes. Well, as soon as somebody figures out a way with technology to make, you know, private school cost $2,000 a year, $3,000 a year, not 10 to 15, you know, the school system has this, I would argue, mass exodus of anyone who's not lower class being like, again, thinking through, you know, someone who's struggling, saying, hey, I can pay $2,000 or $3,000 and actually, you know, help my kid. And so the reason I bring that up is to say, you know, why are these cuts happening? What's going, like, you know, there's an aspect of, as a province, Ontario has the largest, what's called non-sovereign debt per capita in the world. Meaning non-sovereign, meaning we don't print money. The federal government prints money. The next closest is California. And the dilemma we're faced with is, okay, well, we're literally paying for the school system through our kids' taxes, not our taxes, our kids' taxes. And so something's got, you know, between school and medical, those are the two biggest costs for the province. So arguably something's got to give, because deficits for the government are not sustainable. And so I only bring that up to say, okay, well, I look at, you know, a couple of these things, smaller classes, special needs, kindergarten. I put them all in one category to some extent because they all represent costs. And I would say, you know, if you look at a profit-oriented business, when they start losing money, they start going, okay, I got to do things differently. How do I change? The world around me is changing. The school system, the government-funded programs don't have that signal that the world around them is changing and they need to shift. And so when I look at, you know, special needs as an example, I would say, as a, you know, entrepreneur, as someone outside going, why does every kid just get to go to the school that they locally get to go to? Is that the most efficient way as a school board for us to provide the needs for the special needs? Because, and that plays into the smaller class sizes. One of the things, I was literally sitting beside my wife. She's like, she's doing her undergrad through Athabasca. And so I don't know what class she's in right now, but she was like, in her textbook, she was like, it literally word for word says, there is no difference between 20 and 40 kids in a class when you take out those special need type of scenarios, because those are the kids where, like, they really need 1 to 5, right? So now I'm talking purely performance And you've already laid out a great case where like you're going to lose some of that personal relationship. When you have 20 kids, it's way easier to be personal, way more engaged. So I get but what the stat, like I have a study from Fraser Institute that basically found, this is post-secondary, that when you go literally bump that class size up, the marks don't get hindered. Now that I would say to you, go back to what we were talking about with wages. If you've got a teacher who can handle 40 kids and do exceptionally well, they should be paid more than the person who can only handle 30. And because they're providing a greater amount of value. But this is where the pricing system, like, again, this goes back to the economics conversation we have, where it's like prices communicate value. And so because you don't have a price exchange with regards to purchasing of education, we lose that information to recognize, hey, this teacher is more valuable because they're actually being able to bring in, 40 more customers. I know I'm using bad terminology, but the point is to say the system itself has areas where there's flaws that we can't really perceive some of the things we need to perceive. And so I look at the cuts and go, is this a challenge that we need to look at things differently? Could we redesign special education? Could we redesign classroom sizes in a way to say, how do we do this more efficiently and more effective with less money? The problem I would challenge is the union has zero interest in lowering the number of teachers. More students per class means less teachers. They inherently, that is almost a faux pas for the union, because that means they have less responsibility. That means they have less control. That means they're serving their base, being the teachers, less because they had to lower the number of jobs. So even if this is what is needed economically, because financially it's unsustainable, the union will never sign off on it. And guess what? They don't really have to, because the government can't say, well, we're going to go bankrupt like the GM scenario.
Ooh, there were so many points in there.
Yeah.
I don't even know which one. I'm like,
Okay, so can I ask guys, like, is there an end in sight in regards to the strike for parents who are like, yeah, when is this going to end, guys?
I was gonna say,
Nope.
no, not in her head.
I don't.
I think there is, but it has to be on the government's part to look at the demands themselves and say, okay, not just from a business standpoint, from an experience standpoint, because that's what the thing that that maybe is not getting mentioned, which is what we continually say on our podcast, is that the teaching is the experience. You have a whole bunch of adults who say they love children and they want to teach no matter what. That is, some teach kindergarten, some teach grade 12, or some sort of specialist in grade 12. But what is underlying for all teachers is the experience. How do I build an experience that is going to make the students, once they leave my classroom, not only remember what they were learning, but actually enjoy it, and maybe turn that joy that they had for what they were learning, turn it into a career, turn it into a new job or something like that. And the points that we have that are laid out here, all really, to me, when I look at them, they all really look at, okay, how is the government looking at us? Do they see us as people that are just driving out test scores? Or do they see us as professionals that have made it our jobs to enhance the experiences of kids that are from ages 4 to 17? And once we've done that, or if they're going to acknowledge that and acknowledge what we are doing from that standpoint, then you would see that the things that we are asking for, our demands for that fair deal, they are a fair deal, because from previous contracts, not much has changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're asking for more money. And again, and I think that's even why, when you look at that EFTO sheet, why the inflation thing, why it's at the
EFTO for the listeners.
Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario.
Thank you. That's the name of our union. So they have literally on their website, they have the demands that we were just talking about.
And I'll try and I'll get the link from you guys and put it
right?
up. So
the last point is that monetary piece, that money piece, where we're like, okay, we're only looking for the increase to go with how society is increasing. And to an extent, to even today, we got paid in the Peel, where we got paid last Friday. We've already lost that 1% that they're talking about off of one paycheck. Mm-hmm. So this thing is not about money anymore.
Yeah, like it's past, like, yes, that is one of 6 things
Yeah.
on the docket, but like this is the last thing that we are concerned about. Like, I feel like I wish I had a visual. Like, I almost wish this was a YouTube video where I could just bring people into my classroom. Like,
For sure.
I want you to look at my bookshelf. If you look at my bookshelf and it's filled to the brim with books, I purchased all of those with my money. Those weren't-
Really?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm
Is
going to
it-
do a post on my Instagram at some point that shows the difference between a government-funded bookcase and my teacher-funded bookcase.
For sure.
I paid for those books. My classroom right now, I have flexible seating in my classroom. That means that I have couches and exercise balls and floor mats and carpet and all of these different things. So students or stand-up desks. Students can sit wherever they want, what's most beneficial for their learning. All my money. Like, I paid for that classroom. So I just resent people looking at us like, what do you even do in there? Like, what good are you to society? And I feel like that's what you're telling us when we're in this position.
And I would say, I think part of the problem is because of the nature of you work for the union, you don't get your nuanced to be highlighted. You're just part of a broad spectrum. And you might be the exceptional outlier. So unfortunately, you're not going to get recognized. You're not going to get the only way you end up getting recognized, and this is where I would say I take challenge with the seniority aspect of your pay. Like, in essence, they're failing to recognize that you're providing greater than normal value to the students. You're going above and beyond, obviously, with your own resources, such that, should they be reimbursing you? Well, maybe they can't because of the system, but they could reimburse you by saying, okay, we need to reward this teacher before they decide that there's an alternative out there that's better.
But then that I think by doing that, then you take away from that fair and transparency, where now I can essentially say, okay, I like what Alyssa's doing in her classroom, so as her principal, I'm going to make sure that she gets paid more than somebody
and
else.
this is where, but I would say
that's going to cause a lot of strife.
But again, this goes back to, like, what's the cause of that? Well, that's because the school doesn't have to think about profitability, right? Because if they were doing that in an unfair manner, it would cost them to be unfair. But if they were looking at profitability and how much value they're contributing to the students, i.e., school kids aren't leaving because our teachers suck. We're actually increasing because our teachers are so good. You're because I hear what you're saying about the fair side, but I'm going, well, why does that even an issue? That's an issue because of the nature of the system you're in. And so to then point the finger at, well, we can't have meritocracy. It's like the problem is more fundamental. And so, that's where, off the record or before we started, I was talking to you guys about the idea of, my recommendation is really to introduce union competition, right? So for you to be able to say, you know what, I don't know what the number is, let's say $1,000 a year that goes to my union, they're not serving my needs. Maybe you have a unique scenario where, you want to be able to work 3 days a week or only mornings on a full-time contract. Well, that's not even an option because the union negotiated that away, or basically made that, again, they negotiated that away because for the teachers as a whole, it makes sense. But for the individual who wants it, it's not even an option now. Now you got to go to the private sector to find that even as an option. And so my point is that, there's uniformity in who you are because the union is a monopoly. And so there's so much of this tension and relational stuff that, like, I would say you get unfairly demonized by parents, but I would say the union takes almost no flack, whereas I would argue they're more of the problem. And again, I go back to because they lack competition. They don't have to deal with the fact that they're doing their job poorly and teachers are now going to their competition.
I don't know. I'm actually I'm okay with kind of the way we are structured. And maybe this is just a me thing, I don't need a bonus. I don't need a yearly bonus for doing what I feel is best for my students. I'm not saying that every classroom should look like mine, every teacher should be like me, but I know what works for my space and the way, the style of teaching that I kind of put forth. And that's why the podcast is called Teachers Like Us, because we are a little bit kind of against the grain, so to speak, and we do things our own way. But I'm also okay with not having compensation that recognizes that. Like, that's not a big thing for me. And I get the union deal, but if having the greater good kind of service is not for you, then yeah, take your talents to the private sector.
Well,
like,
and I would challenge that statement of the greater good being serviced, because my position would be we are actually worse off because of government schools. Now, there's like a huge layer to unpack that point, but the point is, like, the greater good could be, you know, I could argue, well, if you homeschool 5 kids who are all at risk youth in terms of whether it's trouble or learning and you're not engaged in class, well, and volunteer, well, that's the greater good. You know, like, my point being that I think we too easily look at government jobs as like, oh, we're serving the community. But if you look at compensation wise, government employees make 10% more where for comparative jobs. So this idea of like public servants has gone, in my opinion, has gone to the wayside because you're actually being compensated more. And actually that transpires in the pension aspect of your pay. That 10% more really shows up in your pension.
And truthfully, though, again, I think it's kind of different depending on, for me personally, where you are. But for teaching, I would say, and rightfully so, like, that's kind of, yes, I deserve to be compensated for the work that we're doing. And maybe that's not the case for everybody. And I'm speaking because I know what I do. I know what Andre does in his classroom. Like, our classrooms are side by side.
I would reword what you said, just from an economics perspective. Okay. You should be compensated for the value you contribute. Because there's a whole bunch of teachers who work.
It's true.
But then how do you measure value?
Well, and that's where in the free market, value is measured. Like, let's just use a really simple example that I like using. Let's say you're trying to sell a used phone on Kijiji. Mm-hmm. If I'm like, if you're buying it and I'm selling it, you got to value that phone for more than what you're willing to pay. So if your maximum price is $100 that you're willing to pay, and the minimum price I'm willing to let it go for is $150, a transaction doesn't occur because I value it more than you do. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is where prices, when they're in the free market, communicate information about value. Now, I understand there's a power dynamic. There's aspects where, you know, if you don't hold any sort of influence, you have no ability to command more wages because, you know, your alternative is not working. Now, if you have another job and you're negotiating a new job, you actually gain so much more power. And this is where I would say the good teachers in the seniority system lose the ability to negotiate based on their value.
And what I was going to say was just why, when I brought up the topic of prices, is that essentially by doing that, really the only price that you could look at is test scores.
And see, you want to get rid of some money, scrap EQAO.
I know.
Yeah.
You're teaching the test. I know. Trust me.
Nobody likes EQAO. The kids don't like it. We don't like it. The only people that like it are the government for that very reason.
I kind of liked it because my answer for a math question got used. But anyways.
Exactly, though.
So explain what
EQAO is.
So it's standardized testing. And the goal of the standardized testing is to see or to test where all of our students are in terms of what they are learning in class.
Based on school.
Based on school. And to kind of see where, I guess, children are being educated based on the curriculum, so to speak. Yeah. Like, are you matching the curriculum in terms of, like, when we go back to, like, measurement? Have you hit all these measurement strands so that way your students can regurgitate them on this test that makes them panic? Because they literally are stressed from the time they enter grade 6 all the way up until the day of EQAO. Like, when's EQAO happening? Oh my goodness, I'm not ready.
Yeah, and remember, the first test is in grade 3.
Yeah, like, exactly. Like, you want to get rid of and find some money? Get rid of the nonsense. Like, again, if we even just look at something as simple as history, right? Like,
Darnell's expertise.
Imagine so our curriculum document says for grade 7, explore kind of the roles of individuals in New France. Okay. You can tackle that any way you want. Most teachers tackle it from a Eurocentric perspective, right? Like, they they explored and landed and everything was fantastic.
Yeah,
There was a little
textbook
fight.
from 1997.
Yeah. There was a little fight and then everything was okay.
Pick a controversial
Yeah.
example of like World War II. How much do we tell it from the anti-Nazi story as opposed to never telling? Like if you read the textbook from a German student perspective, you would be blown away that like, oh wait, we don't like, there's not that hatred almost ingrained in, and I only bring that up because I think it's a great point, but there's, you know, even like there's that idea of like the winner tells the story for war or for history.
Absolutely. And I teach my grade 7 history through an Indigenous perspective, right? Like as someone who is Indigenous, like that is important to me that, you know, we honor the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I teach a very Indigenous centric, focused perspective for history. But if we have EQAO as our standard and we go and my kids write that test versus another set of kids who have been taught to the test of New France, it doesn't actually exist for grade 7. So, but they have been taught,
the example.
yeah, like Eurocentric, New France, this is all we want from you. And my kids are coming in and they were like, but what about the Métis? What about the Haudenosaunee and the Oneida? Like, and my kids give that paragraph, they're going to get rated like a level 2, which is a C, or a level 1, which is a D, almost failing. And then your kids who can regurgitate that information, they are getting the A's, and their things will be used as an example on the test.
Exactly.
Yeah. So again, like,
Yeah, and I think, you know, I know we didn't really touch on some of the challenges I put towards as like, I was trying to paint the other side of the picture, but I think, you know, your example of bringing EQAO up as a challenge, I think really resembles where almost there's this talking past each other between the union and you know, the government. I think that my comment about the Uberization of technology or of education is, if we just keep doing what we're doing, meaning, you know, a lot of these questions of funding or resource allocation doesn't say, okay, here's how we're going to do it differently in order to be more cost effective, because we're working with the government to say, we know the budget needs to change because financially we're in an unsustainable place where, you know, there's that part of the conversation is like, the union doesn't even care. I would say that's me as an outsider. Like, there's no care in the cost. It's here's how we're doing it and here's the bill. And so, you know, that's why I brought up, I mean, I would say kindergarten. Our second episode on the podcast was on kindergarten. And basically, full day kindergarten has been proven to have has a negligible effect by grade 2. Now, you did bring up qualitative things with regards to parents having to fund it and you know, the daycare system. But I would even, you know, go more fundamental and say, you know, are we potentially forcing kids out of the home too soon, right? Like, as a developmental perspective, like, I'm blessed with a scenario where my wife, we had 2 kids back to back. Basically, when those kids are 4 or 5 years old, my wife can go back to work. But we decided that it made more sense for our children's development. And I look at it and going, you know what? Being not in, so I have a 2.5-year-old now who's not in daycare. And I might see there's some motor skills he doesn't quite have, or, you know, there's certain things that I'm like, okay, if he was in a daycare system, he'd be exposed to certain things and be doing things differently. But I look at his almost like emotional intelligence, and it far exceeds what I see in other kids. And I would say that's because my wife is able to tailor what he needs to learn on a day-to-day basis. And so my point of bringing that up is to say, you know, this is a huge cultural piece where it's like, okay, you get 9 months off, or now it's 1.5 years off to be a mom, and then go back to the workplace. Like, I know so many people who intentionally go back to work just for 9 months so they can have a second kid.
did that.
And part of the question is like, we almost have to financially,
Yeah.
right? And so, but I would say, is that's what's best for the children? I don't know. I think we've just defaulted into, well, someone else can take care of my kid.
And I think though that, like, you mentioned it, but there's a larger issue, or there's larger issues at play here. Like,
For sure.
I would have loved to stay home with my kids longer. I cannot afford to do that. Again, with 4 kids, like, and I had my kids pretty close together. Like, I had my daughter, I came back to work for a little bit, and I was pregnant with my son out. I was pregnant even before I got back to work with my third, before I left again. And that was just financially, like, I
It was the only
had
option.
to, it was my only option. So while I
But I
get
mean-
that, like, homeschooling is nice, and I would That's a lie. I would not love to homeschool my kids. I like older kids. My kids are crazy.
Exactly, right? You like to homeschool teenagers,
Yeah,
not elementary
absolutely.
school. But I would say like, we had to make sacrifice to make that work, right? Like I live in a basement apartment. We drive one car. Like these are things that like, okay, we think this is valuable. We think this is what we need to do. How are we going to make it happen? And I think, arguably there's too much of, well, we need 2 cars. Well, we need this, or, I can't live in a basement apartment. I got to live, I have to live with this level of prestige and so I would say that's why I said it's a bigger cultural issue of, well, I got to be working, that's where I bring up the question of like, is it better? I don't know the answer, but I do know that full day kindergarten, as an example, financially it's expensive. Like it's not cheap. And if it doesn't reap benefit for the children, and that's where, when we did the episode on it, basically you do see some benefit early, but by grade 2, it gets washed out that's where I bring it up to my wife. It's like, hey, if my kid's slightly behind in language, actually what I've learned is learning language isn't that complicated. It's actually the more like emotional skill that I'm like, I don't even care that he's, I'm talking like 2 to 3 months behind. It's not like he's, saying his first words at 2.5. But that's where I'm like, I'm willing to accept that because it might be abnormal. But from what I've learned, it's still long-term actually beneficial. And so that's where I bring it up, just to say like doing things fundamentally different. The school system, I go back to, there's no profit. There's no signals to say, oh, hold on, we got to do things differently. It's people like you who like, hey, I'm realizing to people more engaged, I got to spend my own money to get kids to be engaged. And so I would say, why is that the case? And I would argue it's because the principal doesn't have the budget with their level of control, with their level of responsibility to say, based on the kids in our particular school, here's what we need to do differently. The school system or the boards are in essence too much of control. I know you said like, yeah, the curriculum is like very linear and like, oh, teach this little simple thing. But, for the most part, the resources you have, how you implement those are not under your control, with the exception of how.
Yeah. How is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with you to an extent, and I think that's why even in our negotiation is why we're looking for a fair deal. It might not be the best deal or the right deal right now, but it is a fair one where we can look at, okay, these are the things that we want. We know what you want. We know what you're looking from us. We need to meet in the middle and make this fair. But in us meeting in the middle, those 6 points, we're not moving from them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's, my challenge was, are we not moving from them because we're going to do it the same way we did, as opposed to how do we do this more cost effectively? Because I think special needs kids, yeah, you need to service them. They need resources. But is there a way that we could do this differently and cut the resources required in half? Similarly, you look at the violence scenarios, right? That's obviously a problem. Okay, how do we look at this differently, right? Do we have the ability to say, you know what, this kid is a problem, he has to leave the classroom? No, you're not allowed to do that for the most part, right? So actually being able to, the problem to some extent, I think, is, again, it's government provided. Well, every kid's got to have the equal experience because the government's funding it. And so, the special needs scenario, no, we can't ship them too far because it's government funded. Meanwhile, they would get probably a better education if there was a commonality in the students they're learning with. Now, the problem, there's that tension between, well, but now we're making them their own class. They're an outsider. They're not with their peers. Fine, but is the goal to be part of your peers or is the goal to learn? And I recognize there's a tension there, but my point is that we're financially in an unsustainable place. And again, I go back to the union saying we just need to do more of the same, as opposed to how do we cut costs, do it differently.
I think that part of that, again, falls on the government. Like, that is on you as the Minister of Education to now start to think about other ways without saying, let's just cut it. But have you looked at other options? Have you really come to sit down? Like, he hasn't even come to negotiate. He's sending his people, which is, if that's the way you do it, that's the way you do it, right? But then if they had a deal, like they were within reach of a deal, they just had to take it back to the minister And the minister was like, nah.
No.
Like, so if everyone who sat down at that table was like, this works for now, what then changed?
Yeah, I mean, that's I mean, we can't answer that question to some extent, but, that's I don't want to say it's a different question, but that's another aspect of this that's, a problem, let's call it. But I go back to, financially, it's, to me, it's concerning because we're just passing the bill. Like,
yeah, but my problem too is that we keep looking at education, or we're trying to treat education like a business, like you keep saying, right? Like it's not.
Well, but I would say we don't. We central plan it. Central planning is the problem, right? Like you talk about the changes at the curriculum level. The problem is the curriculum doesn't deal with nuance, and we're talking about problems that are nuanced.
Yeah,
and so
what we're
to
looking
put
at,
it on
like,
the minister's level, to me, is like I can't plan ahead to that level and actually come up with a solution that's going to be able to deal with these things.
I don't think, again, I feel like we're always looking at things as, if this happens, then this happens, right? Like you need tangible, like
Cause and effect,
right? Like, whereas again, like we've said it a bunch of times, so I feel like we're just repeating it, but it's an experience. Education, unless you are in it, you have no idea, because you're looking at it from an outside saying, well, if you do this and we give you this, then we expect everyone to get their A's and be doctors and lawyers. But like what I'm trying to do is educate and have students who are like, you know what? They have self-awareness. I'm really good with my hands, and I think I'd be an amazing electrician. I want my kids to have that self-awareness and that discipline to figure things out. I don't want puppets, and I'm tired of that. Well, all you do is teach the curriculum. So
yeah,
like,
I was gonna say part of our as much as we were going through the Re-Rise document, another document that we've had is that we are now teachers that are working on empowering modern learners, and it's actually a document that the Peel Board has. And part of that empowering modern learners is saying, okay, we need to put these kids in situations where they are taking charge of their own learning. What do you find exciting? What are the things that you want to pursue? You have an understanding of that. Okay, let's go and pursue that. Or like I say in the podcast, okay, let's go research it. Let's go Google it. Let's go find out. Right. So
how new is that?
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, I think it's 2018.
And this is where I would say my challenge is like, isn't that like a decade too late?
Everything is a decade.
No, but it doesn't happen. It's not, and this is where I go back to you said we're treating it like a business. No, but in business, it's not a decade too late, because the business that was a decade too late is bankrupt.
Okay, I can buy your point there.
Right, and so this is where I go back to this idea that like we don't have the catalyst to tell us, hey, it's time to do things differently.
I feel like we have been, like teachers have been.
Yeah.
This is not working for us. But there's only so much movement, like you were saying, like that you can get as a government employee,
and
right?
You lack the ability to influence or make, cause control. Like you can actually cause change. You lack that ability because of the uniformity in the curriculum, the uniformity in the budget for your classroom. Where you said, oh, I got to go spend all my own money. That bookshelf versus the government bookshelf, right? Like, in essence, how many teachers are willing to spend their own money? I'm sure there's quite a large number, those that are really passionate, but some of them, they just can't afford it.
Yeah, which is fair. And again, goes back to compensation as well. Like some people can't afford
well,
it.
It shouldn't. I would say it shouldn't even be like the fact that you have to pay for yourself shouldn't even be.
I wholeheartedly agree. And again, that's something that I do out of my own.
Well, it helps you to do your job.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so you see the value in spending the money, even though it's your own money.
Absolutely.
And you're bringing yourself into the classroom. Like I want, like just as somebody who sits in a cubicle is gonna have pictures of their wife and children up in the cubicle to remind them, okay, this is not just 8 hours of insanity and typing, but I actually have a family that I love and I kind of like coming here. It's the same thing in our classroom. We make our classroom, as much as we are designing it for our students to stay engaged, it is for us as well. So we're going to make sure that the pieces of ourselves show up in that classroom so that the students are going through an experience with us, the teacher. And that's kind of what that whole Teachers Like Us is. Okay, this is how we do it. I'm a teacher. This is what I do. If you are a teacher and you're finding that you have a disconnect with your students, these may be some things that you might need to start doing, which is having that conversation, having that experience. And in going through all of the cuts and us figuring out how we're going to get to, again, a fair deal, it's on part of the government to take notice that you have teachers sitting in this union that are, again, preparing children for society. And whatever facet they are doing that in, but that's what they're doing. They're getting them ready to get out into the real world. Now, are you going to make it so that there is 40 of them on top of each other that are just reciting things over and over again, and then they're all going to end up with A's, B's, and C's on the test, and nobody's going to care, and they're going to move forward? Or are you going to put them in situations where now these students get to explore the things that they enjoyed from they were younger, so when they were in kindergarten, and now they can be in a place where they can say, like you were saying before, I like working with my hands. I'm going to make sure that I want to be an electrician. I'm going to make sure that I end up in college for this reason, and make sure that I'm pursuing something that I like, so that, again, I don't end up as that person in the cubicle hating coming to work every day.
Yeah, and I think, you're really touching on what I would call you're promoting self-directed learning, which a lot of time is what you see in what's called the unschooling or Montessori programs. And I would say the problem, in my opinion, is because of the uniformity. You guys are almost going outside the system in order to implement something like that. You almost have to play by the rules and then figure out how to add this in, which again, to me, goes back to the central planning concept. It goes back to the idea that, I would say, having a curriculum by school, or maybe a handful of schools, starts to make sense. As we get, how many schools are in your school board, and how many schools are serviced by your union? I just challenge that. Why do we even think that's a good idea? Like, there's a goal of trying to achieve economies of scale, and we're leveraging the resources, but we lack the ability to make the decisions on that level to say, and I would say probably we also don't want schools competing against each other, because you go to that school based on where you live, and the problem with the lack of competition is, you're not forcing schools to continually to strive to be the top of the class, because, well, they got to worry about everybody to some extent at the same time.
Yeah. Guys, thank you for coming through. It was very helpful, very insightful. If people want to get in touch with you and follow your podcasts, what are your social media plugs?
Stop. So you can follow us on Instagram at Teachers Like Us. Our podcast is available wherever podcasts are available, really.
Spotify. I saw Spotify link.
Spotify,
Apple Music, Stitcher, Google
Podbean,
Podcasts.
thanks to me now.
Thank you, Podbean. We each have our own personal teacher Instagrams as well. So mine is complicated. It's A Graysway, but the A is not.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
and mine is
EH.
I am Andre.m.
Cool.
But you can see what our classrooms look like and kind
Really?
of go through. Yeah, I post pictures of my classroom all the time. So if you want to see
And
what,
the notorious bookshelf.
yeah, you want to see that notorious bookshelf and what a teacher-funded classroom looks like, then yeah, check that out.
That's very personal.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know. Do all teachers do that?
There's a lot of teachers who are now starting to do so that we have kind of a community online where we are drawing resources from each other. But there's still a lot of teachers that are, I've done things a certain way for a certain amount of time, and now I only have this amount of time left on the clock. I'm just going to make sure I keep doing it this way.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where, arguably the seniority stuff hinders the student. But we won't go down that road any farther. I think we've hashed it out well enough.
Yeah, but thank you guys for your time and
Thanks for having
your
us.
insights, and hopefully this episode doesn't get you guys in trouble with your bosses. But
Hopefully
that's
we still
all
have a job.
don't worry.
No, I did all the bashing of the union, so they're good.
Yeah. So that's all right. Yeah. So thank you guys again.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
make sense?